What is happening, guys? Cody Plays here, bringing you another Yu-Gi-Oh! Master Duel video. And in today's video, I'm going to be doing a tier list for the post-October 2022 update that introduced the Cosmic Ocean Selection Pack and the Burning Spirits structure deck. So this set, albeit like not too impactful on the surface, is actually very impactful for the current format because it introduced a really powerful card for the Flew Under E strategy in Advent of the Avenger. Helps with consistency a lot. It introduced some really powerful support for the Marincess strategy, as well as different decks like Umi Control and stuff like that. The Burning Spirit structure deck introduced one new card in Decode Talker Heat Soul, which is going to be very impactful for almost all cyber strategies, as well as made Sign It Mining a previously like 3 of UR that you would need to pull for or craft for free to play in the structure deck. So that's going to make the cyber strategies a lot more accessible for ladder play, not necessarily tournament play, as most people have whatever they want if they're going to be playing in tournaments, but for ladder you're probably going to be seeing those decks more often because of that. So I'm just going to be doing a tier list for the meta following those two sets, and it's going to be primarily focused on tournament play. There is going to be some talk about ladder, but more often than not, tournament play is what I'm going to be focusing on, and tournament play usually translates to the ladder. So without further ado, we have a lot of decks to talk about today. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. We have 5 categories today. We have meta defining. This is like tier 1, but more so than tier 1. These are decks that completely define the meta. These are decks that you have to be prepared for if you're going to play in tournaments, because you know you're going to see them no matter what tournament you're playing in. They're going to be very popular and all around. Tier 2 is really powerful decks. These are decks that aren't quite meta-defining, meaning you're not always going to see these in tournaments, but you need to be prepared for them because there's a really good chance you're going to see them. These are decks that are also going to be topping tournaments consistently. Tier 3 is just slightly less powerful than Tier 2. These are decks you're not going to see as much. You're also not going to see them top as much, but they are still very powerful and can win in top tournaments. Rogue, these are decks that you're really not going to see them very often. You know, maybe once every 1 or 2 tournaments every few weeks, but you're not going to be seeing them very often, and they will get a top, every here and there, every once in a while. Needs support / needs buff is exactly what it sounds like. These are decks that are currently 2 hit on the ban list to be consistently good, or we're waiting on support. They might already have support in the OCG or TCG, but we just don't have it here in Master Duel yet, and we're waiting on that. So, like I said, we got a lot of decks to jump into, so we're going to go ahead and jump right in with 8 Axis. This deck is absolutely rogue. It can catch a lot of really powerful decks off guard and just OTK you going second, being a blind second deck. We're currently in a format that caters to a strategy like this because we're not in a format that establishes a lot of negates, or, to be frank, like a lot of the decks in the current format establish versatile disruptions that can disrupt you in a lot of different places. But a deck like this can just tribute your monsters off with Lava Golems or Kaijus and then OTK you. So it's really good into a format like this. It's very good against Sword Soul, pretty good against Despia, so it has a place in the meta. ABC needs support. This is going to be really good when the Therion cards come out, but currently it's not where it needs to be. ABC at 2 is nice, but it's not good enough for it to be consistently played. Adamantipator, this deck is not performing like a tier 3 deck in tournaments, but I have so much respect for this deck because of what it can do going first, and also its potential in the grind game, and even going second sometimes. It has a weird going second matchup against a lot of decks, but it can play going second. It's got the ability to play all the hand traps. It's got the ability to play a lot of really powerful engine cards, and Block Dragon is one of the most insane cards in the game, so it has access to that. The nerfs to this deck do hurt. Hulk, Analyzer, and the Prank's Roxy's all hurt this deck, but it can still compete. Altergeist, this is really the epitome of a rogue deck. It's the deck that, if you're not prepared for it necessarily, you can lose to it or you can beat it. It's kind of just do you draw your floodgates? Do you draw your pieces? Do you draw Imperm plus Multifaker? Okay, they win. The Altergeist player wins, but it's not consistent enough and not overall strong enough to be anything more than rogue, because when people start heavily siding for a deck like this, it kind of just gets destroyed. Red Reboot at 2, all the back row removal being in the game also really hurts this deck. Armed Dragon, this deck needs something. It either needs new support to be released, or it needs something to come off the ban list. Like, I think Tempest coming to 3 could make this deck really interesting, but in its current form, it's not good enough. At Ignister, this deck is definitely a tier 3 deck in my opinion, post the new set release, because we have access to Heat Soul. Heat Soul just makes this deck better. It just gives you extra cards. It just gives you a really good target for a lot of your Ad Ignister spells that require you to reveal a Link monster with 2300 attack. So overall, this deck just got buffed, and it was already very good to begin with. Bee Troopers, this is another rogue deck. The ability to search max C and the ability to have a light/pseudo floodgate in the form of retaliating C makes this deck really good. Where this deck struggles is its engine is very powerful, but not as powerful as the top tier decks, and DPE and the adventure engine being hit makes it so this deck has to rely on its engine primarily, and it can't do that against the top decks. I hope that makes sense. But it's just engine is not strong enough to compete against the meta decks, but it does have a lot of things going for it. Leerlusk, I had this at Rogue in the last tier list, but I was completely wrong. This deck has been performing very, very well in tournaments. I have the Master Duel Meta last 4 weeks tournaments pulled up over here, and Leerlusk, it's topped 5 tournaments. It's got a win, a second place, 2 top 4s, and a top 16. It is performing so much better than I initially thought, and you gotta give credit where credit's due. This deck has been performing great, and it's definitely a tier 2 deck in the current format. Blue Eyes, this absolutely needs support. It might be better than Armed Dragon, but I don't even know if I'd go that far. Branded carries this deck. This is a branded deck with bad Blue Eyes cards in it, sadly. I want Blue Eyes to be cool. I think Blue Eyes is awesome, but it's not very good. It was very much reliant on Crystron Haki Fibrax, which is now banned, of course, and Despia, and all the other strategies just do what this deck does better. Cyber Dragon, I think this is the top of needs support, but it definitely needs support. A branded Cyber Dragon strategy that focuses on going second is very interesting, but it's not good enough to consistently compete with the decks that are actually relevant in the metagame. Dark Magician is right here with Blue Eyes. This deck is absolutely terrible. It's better than Blue Eyes, I want to say. Maybe not. I don't know. It's probably not better than Blue Eyes. It's just another bad branded deck, to be honest with you. And it needs Illusion of Chaos, but when Illusion of Chaos comes out, Spiral is going to be the better deck that plays Illusion of Chaos, which is really sad. So, yeah. Thunder Dragons, in my previous tier list, I had this at tier 3, but this has definitely performed like a rogue deck. It did get a tournament win the other week, which is really, really cool, but it's not topping consistently. It's not even getting top 16s consistently. It's getting random spurts of brilliance here and there. And a deck like that is kind of the epitome of rogue. I think it's got a lot going for it. The ability to make Colossus going first with a Mirror Jade is really powerful, or Colossus plus Titan, or Colossus plus Dragos Depalia, whatever you're going to go for. It's really powerful, but it just does what Despia does less consistently. Not necessarily what Despia does. It just goes for boards similar to Despia in a less consistent fashion, and it loses harder to hand traps than Despia does, surprisingly, and Despia loses hard to certain hand traps. DDD, I think this is definitely a rogue deck right now. I think you could make the argument that this is borderline tier 3 based on how it's been performing recently. We do have 2 DDDs that have topped tournaments in the past month. However, it is one person. So shout out to Jungle Man. This dude's kind of carrying the DDD squad right now. But there are other really great DDD players in the meta, but he's the one that's been topping consistently with it. He got a win, he got a top 4 with it. That's fantastic. But when a deck is only performing when 1 or 2 people is playing it, is the deck really a tier-worthy deck, or is it a rogue deck? It's kind of what separates these decks from the tiered decks, in my opinion. Guys, Despia is clearly in the needs support / needs buff category. This deck has not been performing great the past month. It only has 22 tournament tops, the most of any other deck in the game. We are waiting on some of the trap card supports. We're still waiting on the Albia Lenatus I don't even know how to exactly call that card. I don't know what its name is exactly. This guy right here, Alba Lenatus. We're still waiting on this. We're waiting on a bunch of these different branded trap cards. Let me go ahead and pull some of these up. We're waiting on Branded Exile, Branded Beast, Branded Expulsion, this thing that I've never even read before. It's probably just only an OCG right now. But yeah, we're waiting on all this stuff, and of course the Bestial cards, they'll be coming out in like 6 months or something like that. And when those cards come out, we'll actually see Despia doing some good stuff in the game. Currently it's only the best deck in the game. So it's only meta defining right now. But when those cards come out, we'll see it actually achieve its true potential. Obviously, all jokes aside, this deck is absolutely insane. It is without a doubt the best or second best deck in the game currently. The stats back it up. Playing the deck kind of feels like it's like the best deck in the game. And it's not even at full power. We're still waiting on support for this, so it's only going to get better from here on out. But there is going to be significant power creep in the game when tier elements and Sprite come into the game. So maybe this will no longer be tier 1, but it'll still be a really powerful deck for the foreseeable future. I don't think there's too much to say on Despia. This deck is kind of insane. Dinos are a tier 3 deck, guys. I was mistaken. I put this deck at Rogue because I thought I had a lot of respect for this deck in the Sword Soul and Despia matchups, but it's better than that. It's more than just having good matchups against those decks. It's performing at a high level. In the past month, it's got 4 tops. Granted, a lot of top 16s, 1 top 8, the same players topping multiple times here, but it's performing relatively well in the metagame, and I think it deserves a tier 3 spot. This was a big topic of debate in the comment section of the last tier list that I did. Some people were saying that this is like a tier 3 rogue deck, which is kind of where I was and where I'm still am, but I think it is on the tier list. Other people were saying it's like tier 1.5, tier 2. I don't think it's that strong. I think decks like Despia that are, topping 22 times in a month, there's a clear distinction between that and Dinos, but I have a lot of respect for this deck, and I think tier 3 is a good place for it. Rocket Dragon Link, I think this is definitely a tier 2 deck. I'm a little biased. I love Dragon Link, as you probably know. I just uploaded a deck profile of this where I got second place in a DMC Meta Weekly. I did a deck profile and some test hands. But if you watch that video, you probably noticed that this deck is not easy to play. This deck is very complicated. There's a lot of stuff going on in the combos, so it's easy to miss stuff. I missed stuff, and I noted it in the comment section below on that video. But when a good pilot is able to operate this deck, and I'm not necessarily saying I'm like a great pilot of the deck, but when a good pilot is able to operate this deck can play through almost any boards. It can play through almost any hand traps. The only thing it really struggles with in the current format is playing through a Protoss. It really can't do that. It can establish really powerful going first boards, and it can break boards going second. I think this deck is, without a doubt, a tier 2 deck performing like one. Heroes, I would say, are definitely a rogue strategy. They have been performing good in tournaments, but they still don't have enough going first, in my opinion, to be any more than rogue, and they also lose very hard to Nibiru and Maxi. Drytron, this is definitely a tier 3 deck in my opinion. It's been performing like a rogue / tier 3 deck for a while now, but its power level is kind of... I have a lot of respect for this deck, and this deck is topping, it is winning tournaments, but it's not winning as many as I thought it would, or topping as much as I thought it would. But despite that, the respect I have for this deck still puts it at tier 3. We of course see it topping 3 tournaments in the past month with 1 win, 1 top 16, and 1 top 4. Great numbers, but just not as good as some of the other decks on here. But despite that, I do think it is top of tier 3. Eldritch, this is definitely a rogue deck, guys. It's kind of cemented itself as a middle of the pack deck. But however, I do think I was incorrect in my last tier list saying that this was worse of a control deck than like Altergeist. I think this is all around better because it's more consistent. Altergeist does struggle against hand traps. It struggles against itself. And Eldritch doesn't really do that. Eldritch is kind of like, it's the devil you know. You know exactly what you're going to get almost every single game out of this deck. And there is something really good about that. But I do think Rogue is a good place for it. Red Reboot to 2 really does hurt. Endymion, this is either top of need support or Rogue, but I'm going to go out on a limb and say it's Rogue. I think that the spellbook support really helps a deck like this out. It makes it more consistent and it makes it more versatile. It makes it more expensive, which the deck was already insanely expensive, but it's just kind of how it is. And I think it's a really fun deck to play. I think it's very interesting. And I'd like to see this deck do good in the near future, but we'll see. Floowandereeze. I previously had this at tier 3, but I think with the advent of the adventure coming in, this is definitely going to be a tier 2 deck, maybe even a tier 1 deck. It's been performing consistently somewhat at the highest level, topping in multiple tournaments. It's of course got 4 tops, but it's got a win, a top 4, top 16, second place, so it's performing good, but it's not performing like a meta-defining deck, and I don't think Advent makes it meta-defining. However, you do need to prepare for this every time you come to a tournament, because you will potentially play against it, and if you're not prepared, you will lose. Invoked, this is definitely a rogue deck. I don't think it's a very good rogue deck. I think it's down here with like heroes and stuff. Obviously, it's not comparative to heroes, but I think it's just a worse version of the other Despia lists that are above it. I think I would rather just play, if I'm going to put a 7-card engine, like the Invoked engine, it's either 7 or 8 cards. If I'm going to put that into a deck, like Despia, I would rather just play Allures, the Edgem stuff, so the Frightfur package, Keeper of Dragon Magic, just hand traps, anything like that, than the Invoked engine. I don't think it adds enough to the deck to make it worth playing. Evil Twin, this deck has really fallen off, to be honest with you, but I still think it's a rogue deck. I think it's a very powerful rogue deck, too. It's got the ability to play a lot of hand traps. It's got the ability to establish really, really powerful boss monsters in the form of the Trouble Sunny. It's got infinite recovery. Not infinite recovery, but it recovers very well. It can play through a decent bit because of the hand traps, I would say. And it can just establish interruptions in a lot of different situations, in a lot of different places on the board. So interruptions in the hand, back row, and front row. It's really nice. But despite that, it's not performing like anything better than a rogue deck. I don't even know if it's got a top in the past month. It doesn't look like it has, unless I'm missing it here. But despite that, I do have respect for this deck and think it is in the rogue category. Madolche is also a rogue deck. This different from Evil Twin, this deck actually has results. This deck actually tops tournaments. However, it is like 1 or 2 people that consistently tops with it, so that's important to note. But it's got a lot going for it. It's got the ability to play a good bit of hand traps, similar to some of these other decks. Interruptions in the front line, back line, in the hand, etc. But it's not as good as the tiered decks, and when tiered decks draw good, I feel like this deck just gets outclassed. But that's kind of just my opinion on Madolche. I do think it's all around a good deck, though. Marincess, I think Marincess is going to wind up being about here. I think it's a tier 3 deck. I think it's got the ability to play a lot of hand traps, 15 to 20 of them, which is absolutely insane. It's got the ability to 1-card combo off like 9 cards, I think, in the main deck, which is really powerful. 2-card combo off of like all of its engine, essentially, which is insane. However, I don't think this deck is the best cyber strategy. I think it's better than Agnister currently, because it's more consistent than Agnister, but I don't think it's as good as Salamangreat, which we will get to in a little bit. But we'll see. I could be wrong. Marincess could end up being the best cyber strategy in the game. Numeron, I think this is kind of right here with 8-Axis. They're very similar decks, but they are different. Numeron has got a very good Sword Soul matchup, which is why it's led to topping 3 tournaments in the past month. 1 top 16, 2 second places, but it's only really good. It's kind of being carried by Sword Soul being good. And in side deck events, specifically side deck events, this deck really struggles. And if someone knows how to play against this deck, it really struggles. So all in all, I think it's kind of a rogue deck. It can catch people off guard, but it's not more than that. Orchist, this breaks my heart, but it is in the need support / buff category. The engine is beautiful. I love this engine so much. It's one of my favorite engines that's ever been released in Yu-Gi-Oh! However, they gave us the wrong card back. They gave us 2 Harp Horrors when we need Galateas or Gearsus to come off the list. It's so sad, but I would rather take 2 Harp Horrors than nothing, but it is not the support that we needed. It's not the buff that we needed. putting this deck in Sky Striker, Spiral, Phantom Knights, it's all usable, but those decks perform better without having that extra engine. And that's kind of what separates good engines from bad engines. And sadly, Orcus falls in that category of not being a very good engine right now. It makes the decks that you put it in slightly worse, and that's not what an engine should do. But I hope this changes in the future because I love this deck. Guys, I was wrong about Pendulum Magicians. This deck has been performing very, very well, and it's got a lot of power in the current format. Having consistency added to the deck by having a third Harmonizing Magician and a second Wisdom Eye Magician, and still having that Starving Venom guy. This thing, Supreme King Dragon Starving Venom, which gives you basically 4 Electromites. This card's insane. I don't know why this card ever got printed, but it's absolutely insane. And it can just abuse that card multiple times in a turn. So because of that, this deck is very, very powerful and has a lot of potential. I think it's probably all around. I think it's worse than not Adagnister. I think it's worse than Adamancipator, but it's currently performing right here. But I think it's probably at the bottom of tier 3. It still does have pendulum problems. It needs 2-3 cards to go off, and it loses very hard to hand traps. But despite that, it is still a very powerful deck. Adventure Phantom Knights, this deck is without a doubt tier 2. It's been performing like such, and it's going to continue to, in my opinion. I want people to get away from DPE in this deck. I've been saying that for a month now, but people are still playing DPE in it, and it's still working. But I don't think that's the proper way to go. I would recommend just, go for Appaloozas and Fog Blades, some other versatile link monsters for your inboard, and then just worry about having recovery for the next turn. Because this deck, it's really hard to get OTK'd if you're playing Phantom Knights. And it's got incredible turn 3s. But people are still going with the DPE stuff, which just adds bricks, in my opinion. Prank Kids, this deck is bottom rogue. Honestly, it's probably down here. I think I rated this too highly in the last video. But it can still compete. If I'm going to be fully objective, it's probably here, I guess. I don't know. It's hard to put a deck like this because the DPE hit really hurts. The Adventure hit really hurts. The Meow hit just is devastating. The fact that now you can't really go for DPE because DPE sucks, and it doesn't have the Celestial, which is honestly the best part of DPE, it makes it so you kind of need to go for Butler. But now Butler only has 1 board wipe because you have to recycle the Meow with your pranks. And it's just, overall, this deck's just in a really bad spot. And I think if they gave us back 3 Meows, but hit the Adventure stuff and the DPE stuff, this deck would be a tier 3 deck, top of a Rogue or something like that. But it wouldn't be meta-defining anymore. So I think they over-nerfed this deck, in my opinion. But I would rather them over-nerf it than under-nerf it, because this deck is very toxic, in my personal opinion. Salamangreat, I think this is top of tier 3. This might even break into tier 2 in the current format. It's very powerful. It has a great turn 1. It's got the ability to establish Floodgate-like cards in the form of Baguska. It's got the ability to play Rage and Roar, search those out. And it's almost impossible to OTK through a Salamangreat board. It doesn't establish a lot of interruptions, but it establishes enough disruption to not die, and then it can just OTK with access code on the next turn. We have now Heat Soul, which is a huge upgrade for the deck. You can still play 15 hand traps in the deck and very consistently powerful engine cards. It's the best cyber strategy in my opinion, and I highly suspect we're going to see this perform very well in tournaments. Maybe even at a tier 2 level, but definitely at a tier 3 level. This is Sangan. So this is 3-axis adventure combo. Just play Phantom Knights. This version of the deck is dead because Hulk is dead. I still think people could figure some stuff out with Union Carrier, but it's not going to be as good as Hulk. So yeah, just rest in peace, Sangan. Shadal's, this is honestly Rogue. It's right here with Invoked, I think. I think they're kind of interchangeable. They're not interchangeable, but they're along the same power level in the current format. Winda's is not as good in this game as it is in TCG because we have Maxi. Maxi kind of just does what Winda does, but you can do it in any deck. And also, why would you play Shadal cards in Despia when you could just play Despia cards and branded cards in Despia and just be more consistent? That's kind of the whole question here. I do like the idea of teching in one-shot-all dragon for backer removal in Despia and having access to Winda, but other than that, I would not play a big shit-all engine. Sky Striker, this is like it's a middle of the pack control deck currently. It's got too many nerfs to be good, but it's not nerfed enough to be bad. It's not as bad as these decks, basically, is what I'm saying. All these decks down here. It's still consistent, and it's still consistently good, but it's just not as good as the meta stuff. The spellbook buffs definitely help this, and it makes it a very interesting strategy, but they sort of conflict, right? Judgment and Sky Striker conflict with one another, but you can play them together. So, I think middle of the pack of Rogue is where this deck should fall. Alright. Speedroids. This deck won a tournament or something, but that doesn't change the fact that it's literally just a Rogue deck. I think it won a tournament. I might be wrong. No, it got second place in a tournament. So that's pretty cool. But it's a Rogue deck, guys. It loses too hard to Maxi for it to be anything more. It's not as good of a combo deck as any of the stuff above it, really. Spellbooks. I'm putting this right here with Orcust because I think it's the exact same problem with Orcust. This is an engine, not a deck, in its current form. It is a deck. I don't want to be rude to it. I mean, Orcust and Spellbook are both real decks, but they're better used as engines in the current format, and most of the time, your deck is just better if you play your deck without these engines. Just play a better engine is kind of the whole point, right? So, yeah. Sadly, this is just not very good. It makes Endymion better, which is the reason I think this deck is Rogue, but really nothing more. Spiral, I think this is tier 2, tier 3, bottom tier 2, maybe top tier 3, but it's going to only get better with time as more people learn how to play this deck, because it is a very complicated deck. It's more complicated than Dragon Link, I think. That might not... It's more complicated than Dragon Link. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that. But it's a very complicated combo deck that takes a lot of practice and a lot of dedication to be good with. But when you reach that point, you can definitely top tournaments with this. It's got the power level to be tier 2, and it's only going to get stronger when we get Illusion of Chaos. When we get Illusion of Chaos, this is going to be top tier 2, meta-defining in that range. But right now, I think it's bottom tier 2. It might be better than Phantom Knights, but I think it's probably at the bottom of tier 2. Sword Soul, this is right here with Despia. This is absolutely a meta-defining deck. Protoss is one of the most insane cards in the game. It is literally just an FTK against Despia. Not really. Sometimes against Despia. Dragon Link, FTK against that deck. It's very good against Phantom Knights. It's basically an FTK against them too. It's basically an FTK against Spiral. It can be an FTK against Drytron if they call lights. Overall, Protoss just makes this deck head and shoulders above everything else except for Despia. And yeah, I don't think there's much to say about it. The tournament results back that up. It has topped 16 times in the past month compared to the 22 of Despia. And then the third most is Dragon Link and Tri-Birds at 5. So there's a clear distinction between these top tier decks and these tier 2, tier 3 decks. Adventure combo, this deck's dead in its current form. Just play Sword Soul. Sword Soul is just a better version of this deck now. Just play Mogis and just use your normal summon. Adventure's too nerfed. Hulk is nerfed. Hulk is banned. So sadly, this deck is just banned, but it's really not sad, right? Because this deck was kind of toxic. Tri-Brigade. I might be wrong with this, but I think pure Tri-Brigade, Zodiac Tri-Brigade, or branded Tri-Brigade is still better than Birds. It's not performing like so, but when I play the decks, I feel like this deck is just too strong not to be better. Like, it's too consistent across the board. It has the ability to play all the hand traps, all these different really powerful engines. It can play Adventure still. It can play Zodiac, which gives you access to Trident, Zeus, etc. It's so versatile. It's so powerful, but it's not getting the representation that I think it deserves. We've only got one Tri-Brigade here, one Zodiac here, one Tri-Zoo here, and they're just not performing great. But when it does get picked up in tournaments, it competes very well. I had it here in the last tier list, and I don't think that's necessarily wrong, because I think power level it is here, But in representation and I guess by extension performance, it's down here or down here. But it's going to be in tier 2 for my list because I have a lot of respect for it. Virtual World, I think this is a borderline tier 3 deck. It's a rogue / tier 3 deck that's performing better than it should be. It's topped a lot of tournaments recently, but it's like some of the same players topping tournaments with it. And like overall, I don't understand like why someone would play this over some of the other combo decks in the game currently. It just doesn't have. It's got a lot of really great applications and interactions, but not enough. And it's not consistent enough and too nerfed, in my opinion, to be anything more than Rogue. Zephyra, this is right here with Endymion and Speedroid. Like this, basically, Zephyra is like the hybrid version of Speedroid combo pendulum, just summon spam. It's like 60 card pendulum that once you get rolling, you're not losing, but it's just a weird combination of cards. It's really cool, but it's just not very good. Let me pull this deck up really quickly. So yeah, I got top 16 in a tournament a few weeks ago, and yeah, it's just 60 cards. It plays the Endymion cards, it plays the pendulum cards, it plays the DDD cards, it plays, oh gosh, it just plays so many just different engines, and it's so cool, but it's just so inconsistent and so random. I love it, but it's not very good, sadly. The final deck I want to talk about is Zodiac. I think Rogue is a great place for a deck like this. It's great going second, it's pretty bad going first. It can play 15 to 20 hand traps. It can play cards like Zeus, Mega Fortress, the Mega Clops Fortress thingy, the guy that Link 3 or Link 4 that is unaffected by monster effects except Exceeds. It's got a lot of applications, but it's not good in a format that's dominated by Despia, because one Mirror Jade just destroys a deck like this. So, yeah. Anyways, that is going to do it for my tier list. Post the October 2022 update, post the Cosmic Ocean set release, and Burning Spirit structure deck. Let me know what you guys think. What did I get right? What did I get wrong? What decks did I leave off this tier list that you want to see on the next one? And what other videos would you like to see for me here in the next coming weeks? So, yeah. Thank you guys so much. Like I said, let me know down below what you think. Leave a like, comment, subscribe. And I'll see you in the next video. Peace.